What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about NIO stock and break down how the market may affect NIO for the next few months. Break down why I'm still very bullish for the end of the year for NIO and also for NIO for the end of this year. And break down what's going on with the market, what's going on with SPY and the QQQ, and why the market ended up selling off the way it did, and how this could end up affecting NIO. But before breaking things down with all this information, before I talk about why this is going to be very significant, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just 2 weeks, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so looking at NIO, it was down about 4% for the day on Friday, but the question is, how will NIO move going forward? But one thing I want to mention is that something that's continuing to circulate in the news would be this Fitch news about how Fitch has downgraded the US long-term rating from a AAA rating to a AA plus. I did mention this briefly yesterday in my video, but I want to just say that if you don't know what this means, it's basically just a rating that is used by foreign developers out there, foreign investors that want to invest in the USA or even take on some risk. And then in doing so, it's the US that's going to be having the financial obligations to pay back those investors. Now, in doing so, if you're basically loaning out money to someone, you need to get your interest payments back, basically. And in order for you to get a good amount of security to get your payments back from that individual, you're going to need a rating, right? It's kind of like a credit score. And this credit score for the US was basically issued by different companies. And right now, these issuers are basically downgrading the US's rating. They're downgrading it. They're basically doing so in a way that's going to affect the markets. But what is suspicious about it is how the US decided to start falling on this news. The US stock market, looking at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, starting on August 1st. And that historically tends to be a weak time for SPY. Because when you look at SPY, if you look at it just like this, you will notice that historically, SPY right over here tends to slow down during the month of, I think it's right here, during the month of like August through September, we tend to see SPY in the market slow down. And the timing is very suspicious. It's almost as if they came up with this news just to get the market to slow down. I also want to add that a lot of these fund managers were relatively late when it came to their investments into the US systems. And looking at his history, the market has been very greedy, and the market had a tendency of dropping very hard the last time we got a downgrade, right? This was back in 2011. And the question is, will we see a repeat? Well, so far it's starting to do that. We are starting to see the market slow down as a result of this downgrade. And to add on to this, just looking at the fear and greed index, you will notice that market volatility is continuing to increase, and we're continuing to see more and more investors stepping in. The market was very greedy, and we hit these extreme levels. Like the McCullen volume summation index was extremely greedy. If you look at the extreme greed on the stock price index, and you look at all these different things, the market momentum indicators are all suggesting the market's very greedy, and it's a little bit overvalued in a way, right? You could argue that technically, and seeing that, we're starting to see the market volatility going up as the VIX is breaking the 50 EMA, which is suggesting more fear is coming in. And the market is due for some downside. So what does all of this have to do with NIO? Historically, NIO, it does tend to slow down in August, but September tends to be a better month. October tends to be weaker, and then like November and December tend to be okay months. But I don't think it's going to play like this for NIO historically. What I'm basically thinking is simple. I think that these fund managers that were kind of late into the party when it came to buying into the markets, the ones that were late into, the ones that shorted a little bit too late and took some losses, I think they're trying to get a dip so they can start buying back in during the months of August through September, buy the dips, buy in low, and then let the market run starting in October. It could happen sooner, but maybe around October time. And then as we approach November, I think it's going to get even crazier, and we're going to see a much bigger run. So I am anticipating some like downwards price action, some chop as well. Very boring August through September, just for a couple of weeks. And then once we get past these time frames, we're going to see a very monstrous run at the end of the year for the entire stock market. Because remember, for the month of November, SPY, the S&P 500, SPX, These things are green 80% of the time in November. Almost every single day they're green in November. That's like 4 out of 5 days a week on average. The market's going to be green for just the month of November alone. And that's pretty crazy if you think about it, right? It tends to be a very, very strong month. And I think there's a good chance we're going to see something like that, another monstrous rally at the end of the year. So if you want to cause a monstrous rally at the end of the year, how are you going to do this? And what you first want to do is get all the selling out of the way first, right? Around the August, September period, get all of the selling out of the way. Then as we approach uh, the October period going into like November, then you start pumping the market insanely hard, and we're going to see this reacting throughout the stock market. So for NIO, if you look at NIO has a tendency of moving. Where is it? I think it's up here somewhere. NIO tends to move very similar to that of the market. You can see right here, we have SPY next to NIO. And let's actually pull up the QQQ because I think the QQQ is a better one we could use. So basically, NIO and the QQQ, they pumped together. This was last year. They came down together, they pumped together, they came down together, pumped together, came down together, pumped together. Then they started coming down together. But then the QQQ started outperforming NIO during this period right here. This was just over the last few months because NIO had some bearish news that was coming out. NIO was relatively weak. Do you guys remember how NIO ended up seeing slowdowns? Deliveries were not that good for April and May. Just lots of bad news was coming out for NIO, and NIO was relatively weak at this time. This is why the price-price ratio was dropping right here. So NIO was underperforming, and then the QQQ was continuing to run. Then NIO started to catch up. It's playing a game of catch up. It's trying to make a comeback. I mentioned on the channel that NIO was like a slingshot. They pulled the rubber band very hard back, and now NIO is trying to slingshot its way back up, pushing up very hard. So that's what's been going on. You can see there's a connection between the NASDAQ, the Triple Q, consumer discretionaries, and NIO. And I believe NIO is going to get dragged by all of this. So I would say that there could be a slowdown coming for the markets in NIO, that there is a possibility of that. Could this be like a left shoulder ahead, maybe a right shoulder forming? We might see a lot of choppy price action, right, for the next few weeks for NIO. It may not be as strong as what we saw recently. Then by the next deliveries, we could see an improvement in September, the beginning of every month, or like approaching it. And we may just see this thing continue to range trade for a while, pump, come down a little bit, pump, come down a little bit, and just go back and forth and back and forth. But then by the time we get to October, if NIO is still in like the 10s or the 11s or wherever this thing is, if it's in the 12s or 13s, wherever it is, by October/November, we're going to likely see NIO start pumping very, very hard with the market. It could even start earlier than that after the FOMC meeting near the end of September. It could happen much earlier. We might see NIO start pumping with the market during this October/November period going into December. And then that's when we might see NIO push all the way up for the 22s, the 24s, and etc. at the very end of the year. You can see right over here, we have this nice accumulation and bullish divergence that developed. NIO could, trade a little sideways for a while before this thing continues to push into the 20s. I do believe it could realistically get to 22 to 24 a share by the end of the year. It's going to start off kind of weak, okay, for August through September. We could see some weakness because of the market, but wait for October. Things are going to get real starting then. We're going to see some monstrous pumping by the stock market. It's going to be very fun to play, very volatile, and it's going to be very profitable for a lot of investors. Okay, so that's my view for NIO. A slight slowdown for August through September, and then some very, very bullish price action as we approach Q4. I also think the whole market is going to follow this trend. We're going to see Tesla doing the same thing. Tesla's going to likely slow down for a month or so, come back down to some of these levels, fill some of these gaps. And then once it fills some of the gaps, it doesn't have to fill everything, but some. We're going to see a monstrous pump for Q4, most likely. It also depends on their earnings and other factors. I think NIO is going to have a relatively good Q3 earnings. Q2, I'm not too sure about Q2. We're just going to wait on that and see how that affects NIO. It depends on their guidance and factors like that. But regardless of what happens, I'm still very bullish for the end of the year, and I think NIO is going to do very well. All right, so that's my view of the market in a nutshell. Basically, sideways price action, maybe some downside, more downside for different stocks out there, and also NIO for August through September, possibly. Then either by the end of September, if not going into October/November, I'm expecting a monstrous pump to come, especially in November, and then going into December to close the year strong. I think that's very probable, and I think that's what's going to most likely play out. And I still think NIO is getting ready for a monstrous Q4 pump. And before the pump comes, before the big squeeze, we have some downside. I think that's very likely. Don't worry too much about it because remember, the time really flies when you are having fun or playing the charts or working very hard. It's going to go quickly. We're already almost a week past August. Once August is out of the way, we have September, and October is when things will really, really start to improve. And we're going to see some monstrous pumping very, very soon. All right, guys. So thank you for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. NIO in the market to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright. And peace out.